Because of you, I'll be poor for the rest of my life. We're getting divorced.
When my husband, who came home drunk, asked about the balance of our shared savings and I answered, he started saying such things. Then, the next day when I returned from work, my husband was gone. And in his place was a divorce application and my banking card, burnt, placed on the table. I'll give you the car and the house. Just make sure to take responsibility. Several days later, I changed everything to my husband's name and left the house. And then, a few weeks later, my husband and his mistress turned pale when they learned a certain fact. My name is Ashley, and I'm 50 years old. I've been working as an employee in the company where I've been employed since before I got married. I'm part of a family of 3, with my husband Johnny, who is 3 years older than me, and our 25-year-old son, Frederick. I met Johnny when I was 23 through a colleague's introduction. Johnny worked for one of our business partners and was known for being handsome. I couldn't believe that someone like him would be interested in me. But for some reason, Johnny approached me and we ended up dating. Colleagues envied me, and I was truly at the peak of happiness. After a year of dating, Johnny and I got married. Shortly after getting married, I became pregnant, and I gave birth to Frederick when I was 25. We were blessed with a child, and we had happy days together. Raising a child was challenging at times, but even Frederick has grown into a fine adult. The children have become independent, but I haven't had a moment to rest. It's all because of a certain action Johnny took. Johnny's particular behavior involved making unreasonable demands of me. He was always somewhat of a henpecked husband, but lately it's gotten even worse. For example, he insists that I wake up at the crack of dawn and clean the entire house. Or he requests not only the main dish, but also 5 side dishes for breakfast. Johnny is very particular about his foods and doesn't allow frozen meals, hot deli items, or pre-cooked dishes. I served a pre-cooked dish once, but he threw it away right in front of me. Johnny believes that everything he eats must be handmade from scratch. As I work full-time every day, it's quite challenging for me to meet Johnny's demands. So I tried to explain this to Johnny. However, he simply responded with annoyance.
Don't defy your husband. You should obediently do as I say.
And he continued to demand perfection from me. Even if I ignore what Johnny says, he sets an alarm for 4 a.m. I rarely wake up at 4 a.m., but by 5 a.m., I am already busy with household chores every morning. Despite having dual incomes, Johnny doesn't help with housework at all, which frustrates me. But Johnny has been the same since our child was little. He has probably held our son Frederick only a few times. He's never changed a diaper or prepared a meal, and he was uncooperative when it came to parenting. He never participated in school events like school performances or open houses. To Frederick, he probably seemed no more than just a housemate. Indeed, Frederick deeply disliked Johnny.
Why don't you just divorce that guy? I could easily support you on my own, Mom.
Frederick says this to me. After graduating from college, Frederick joined a major corporation. He often contacts me out of concern for me living with Johnny. While I assure Frederick that I'm fine, the truth is, I'm reaching my limit. Recently, Johnny has been imposing strict savings measures on me alone. Whenever I consider buying cosmetics or clothes for myself, he asks about the prices and tells me not to waste money. He complains every time I make a purchase. Johnny is obsessed with saving money and constantly criticizes my spending habits, but he freely indulges himself. When I point this out,
I'm the husband, so it's okay for me. Don't dictate to me.
He responds with incomprehensible arguments. Johnny has a reason for pressuring me to save money. It's because he spends it on going to the bar. He claims that he needs to go to the bar for socializing, and for the past few months, I haven't received any proper living expenses from him. Well, to be honest, I can manage our expenses just fine, even without Johnny's contribution. One day, after living like this for a while, Johnny came home completely drunk. I moved Johnny to the sofa and tried to take care of him, giving him water, and in that state, he suddenly asked about our shared savings as a married couple. I thought it was just drunken talk and gave a casual response, but Johnny seemed dead serious. So I brought Johnny's banking card for our shared savings, accessed it, and showed it to him.
Huh? You've only saved $30,000?
Johnny says this while glaring at me. So I explained that it's not easy to save money quickly because of our regular expenses and cost of living. But Johnny blames me, saying it's because of my wasteful spending. Johnny is drunk, so I don't know what he's saying, but he's shouting something. Then he looks at me straight in the face and says seriously,
"Because of you, I'll be poor for the rest of my life. I want a divorce."
Said with this serious expression. When I asked him to repeat, Johnny spoke clearly.
"If I stay with you like this, I'll become a pauper. I want to divorce you and be happy with Irene."
After saying that, Johnny immediately falls asleep. The name Irene rings a bell to me. That's because Irene was Johnny's affair partner. Around the time Johnny started pressuring me to save money, I began to feel suspicious of him. Just to be sure, I hired a detective agency to investigate Johnny. As a result, it was revealed that Johnny was having an affair with a female bar employee. At first, I thought they had a customer-employee relationship, but the investigation proved it was an affair. They were even talking about getting married after divorcing me. Honestly, I thought I might be shocked when I found out about the affair, but surprisingly, I wasn't shocked at all. On the contrary, I felt more anger than anything else, and I was determined to corner Johnny and Irene thoroughly. The next day, Johnny seemed to have taken a day off from work due to his hangover. When I tried to talk to him before leaving for work,
"I'm off today, so don't talk to me,"
he said in a tired voice. I left Johnny like that and went to work. That evening, when I returned from work, Johnny was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a note on the living room table, along with a filled-out divorce application. Next to the divorce application was a burnt banking card. I could barely make out the name, but it was my name on the banking card. When I looked at the note, it said that the banking card was useless since the account had no money, and Johnny had burned it. He had signed the divorce application and instructed me to contact him. Furthermore, it mentioned that the joint savings account of the couple would be taken as a parting gift. It seemed like that $30,000 had been taken away by Johnny. I never imagined things would escalate so quickly. I immediately called Frederick to report the situation. Frederick was also quite surprised, but his anger surpassed mine. He said he would cooperate with anything, so I quickly made a request. After some preparations, I informed Johnny that I'd filled out the divorce application. He agreed to discuss all the procedures and returned home without hesitation. However, Johnny didn't come home alone. He brought Irene with him. They were happily talking about getting engaged once the divorce was finalized. Despite being in my presence, I couldn't hold back and said to the cheerful couple, "I'll give you everything, so we can change everything to your name?" When I said that, Johnny and Irene's attitudes changed. Johnny exclaimed,
"The house and the car will be mine."
He was overjoyed. Irene also said, "I'm so lucky to live in this house." With that, I asked them to confirm the documents and sign. However, they were more excited than careful. Johnny quickly signed without much confirmation. The next day, I submitted the divorce application and had to leave the house. Regarding the move, I took a paid leave from work and asked Frederick to take a day off to help with the move. With the help of Frederick's friends, we were able to complete the move in just a few hours. As for finding a new house, nothing was confirmed yet. We considered short-term apartments, but we couldn't find a suitable place. For the time being, I decided to live with Frederick at his house. The divorce from Johnny was finalized a few weeks later. Suddenly, I received a call from Johnny, and when I answered,
"Hey, what is this all about?"
he shouted without any greeting. I had been expecting this call for some time, so I smiled and replied. To avoid Johnny realizing that I was laughing, I proposed meeting in person to talk. Johnny suggested that we discuss it at his house. When I mentioned to Frederick, who was home on a break, that I was going to have a discussion with Johnny,
"I'll come too. It might be the last time I see that guy's face."
So, with Frederick, I headed to Johnny's house. When we arrived and rang the doorbell, Johnny, who seemed displeased, came out. He was surprised, probably because he thought I was coming alone. We were led into the living room, and there, Irene, who had the same displeased expression as Johnny, was present. It seemed that Irene had moved in right after I left. The house I used to live in had changed dramatically. The simple room had transformed into an extremely flashy one, all pink, which was a far cry from what it used to be. The room was so dazzling that Frederick and I couldn't help but exchange awkward smiles. Then, the bizarre discussion involving the four of us began. Johnny exhibited hostility toward me from his very first words.
"You stole my money, didn't you? You're the one who withdrew it from the bank without permission."
He started saying unbelievable things. Irene also joined Johnny in attacking me. According to Johnny, today was his payday, and he had tried to withdraw his money as usual, but there was an insufficient balance. And when he checked, there was only less than $100 left.
"You withdrew it before I did,"
Johnny shouted angrily at me, and I replied, "You have the banking card, so how could I have used it?" I asked the obvious question. Johnny seemed to become a bit calmer and said,
"Huh?"
in a perplexed manner. During our marriage, I had been in charge of Johnny's banking card to some extent. However, I had never touched the money in Johnny's bank account even once. I had only kept it along with my own banking card. Of course, during the divorce discussions, I had returned Johnny's banking card.
"Then why is the balance only a few $1,000s? Could it be that the banking account information leaked?"
Johnny pondered aloud, saying that something was strange. Beside Johnny, the affair partner also seemed agitated, suggesting that if information leaked, it might be a good idea to report it to the police. Seeing Johnny and Irene in this state, I had to desperately restrain myself from laughing. When I glanced to the side, I noticed that Frederick was also holding back his laughter, trembling slightly as he looked down. I wondered what could have triggered such a thought. Johnny and Irene were on the verge of reporting this absurd situation to the police. I couldn't involve the police in such a ridiculous matter, so I decided to convey a certain fact to them. Isn't it natural that it's running low? With the mortgage for the house and car, utility bills, mobile phone expenses, and various other costs coming out of your bank account? If anything, there might be some expenses that didn't go through due to insufficient funds. When I explained this to them, they asked what I meant. So I decided to provide a more understandable explanation for both of them. The house we lived in was a newly built house from 20 years ago. It had a 30-year mortgage, and there were still 10 years left on the house loan. Initially, the amount was set to be split between Johnny and me, so he had to pay nearly $1,000 a month for the house loan alone. About 10 years ago, Johnny used to contribute half of that amount, but over the years, his contribution decreased. A few years ago, he stopped paying even a cent. I reminded Johnny several times, but he would just say, "It's tough this month," and that's how it's been until now. And then he disclosed that there was another loan, aside from the one for the house. It was for a car. About a year ago, my small car, which I had been driving for over a decade, finally stopped working. I thought it was time for a replacement, and as I looked at brochures for new cars,
"Cars aren't something you replace frequently. Let's get a good one this time."
Johnny suddenly said. At that time, Johnny wasn't particularly concerned about saving money, but I considered I'd keep the car for over 10 years. So I agreed to Johnny's proposal. Although I initially intended to choose a car that suited me, we ended up buying a car that Johnny liked. Johnny didn't consider my opinion at all and insisted on his preferred car. Honestly, I didn't have strong preferences, and since Johnny would also be using the car, I left the choice to him. Initially, I planned to purchase the car with my savings in a lump sum. However, when I saw the estimate, I was greatly surprised. Without my knowledge, Johnny had added various options and upgraded the car. The cost had more than doubled the planned amount, so I reluctantly decided to take out a 5-year loan. The car was registered in my name, so naturally I was responsible for the payment. Regarding the car loan, Johnny had not made a single payment. Every month we needed to make payments of a few $100s, and just for the house and car, it exceeded $1,000. When you added utilities like electricity, water, and gas, along with mobile phone bills, it was impossible to cover all the expenses with Johnny's take-home pay of $2.5K. Johnny had a track record of not staying in jobs for long, and he had only been with his current company for the past 2 years. He typically quit after a few years, which resulted in an income significantly lower than the average salary for someone in their 50s. It was a waste, because if he had stayed at a job for an extended period, he could earn a decent salary. So Johnny's monthly income was only slightly higher than that of a fresh graduate. I think we'll have to rely on dual income with Irene if we want to make it work here. When I said that, Irene let out a small voice. I had anticipated that something like this might happen. I had anticipated this situation because Johnny had only given me $300 as living expenses. Therefore, Johnny had no idea how much money was needed for our monthly expenses. I had been covering 90% of the living expenses when I lived with Johnny. I think Johnny believed that $1,000 was enough for living. I knew this would happen, so I decided to divorce without claiming compensation or property division, leaving everything to Johnny, and even changed all the bank accounts for payments to be under Johnny's name. As a result, Johnny's bank account went into overdraft due to the automatic withdrawals for payments. When I explained in detail for Johnny and Irene to understand, their earlier bravado vanished. Realizing the gravity of their situation, they both turned pale. Wait. This isn't what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for no money, said Irene, approaching Johnny with frustration. But Johnny looked stunned, fixated on one point. In that moment, I proposed a certain suggestion. If it's tough for you to pay off the car and house loans, should I take them over?
Huh? What are you talking about? I can't afford to pay, and there's no way I'll let you, a poor person, pay.
You don't have to worry about that. You see, my monthly income is more than double yours. Besides, I have $1 million in savings, so I can easily cover it. Johnny then said,
You're lying,
and started blaming me. So I showed Johnny and Irene my balance through online banking. I work in a specialized profession, and I have longer working hours than Johnny. I've been working since graduating from vocational school, and I've held reasonably high positions. It's only natural that I earn more than a regular employee who keeps changing jobs. When I told Johnny that the burned banking card was from the account with $1 million, he demanded,
Were you hiding it from me? Hand over half as part of property division.
Just a while ago, Johnny was in despair, but now he and Irene were shouting together. So I decided to explain the reason for having $1 million in savings. $1 million is separate property, so it's not subject to property division. You don't need to receive it.
Huh? Separate property? What's that?
In reality, my $1 million savings were inherited money from my grandpa. My grandpa was a wealthy and frugal man. When he passed away, a substantial inheritance was left. His will stated that it should be distributed equally among the family members. including children, siblings, and grandchildren. However, I ended up inheriting the substantial sum of $1 million. When my grandpa passed away initially, I was already married to Johnny, so I had planned to discuss the inheritance with him. However, my mother advised me to keep quiet about the money, saying that it could drive people crazy, so I didn't tell Johnny. But I think it was the right decision not to tell him. If he had known, he would have definitely used it without my consent. When I explained to Johnny and Irene once again that separate property wasn't part of the marital estate for property division, Johnny said,
"It can't be true. What are we going to do from now on?"
Johnny was holding his head in despair, and Irene was crying beside him. To the two of them I said, "If you're planning to let go of the house and car, feel free to contact me, and I'll give them to you for free." Then I left the house with Frederick. I can foresee Johnny begging desperately if it comes to giving up the house and car. I had been paying most of the loans for the house and car. Probably Johnny won't be able to keep up with the loans for 10 more years. Neither Johnny nor Irene had the energy to respond to my words. On the way home in the car,
It's embarrassing that he's my dad,
Frederick said. It's quite pathetic to make my own son Frederick say such things about his own father. I had no words to respond and could only smile bitterly. I hope Frederick won't resemble his father and will become a decent human being. A few days later, Johnny called me again and asked to meet at a cafe. It seemed that he still couldn't afford to pay for the car and house, and he begged me to help him with them. As I promised, I changed the ownership of the house and car to my name. I had no intention of living in the house where I had lived with Johnny, so I paid off the remaining loans and started the process of selling it through a real estate agency. It was a bit difficult to sell the house where I had lived for many years, but I made up my mind. I hope it finds a good owner. As for the car, I decided not to sell it and kept it for my own use. It's a good car with various options, and having a car is convenient for various reasons. During the ownership transfer, Johnny asked me for a reconciliation. He told me there was a fight with Irene after our previous conversation. When Irene found out that Johnny had no money, she quickly abandoned him and disappeared. She had already quit the bar where she used to work, so no one knows where she is now. Therefore, Johnny is currently living alone in a small apartment. To Johnny, who once was my husband, I said, "If you continue to bother me, I'll demand half of the compensation for Irene and the $30,000 you took on your own." Upon hearing this, Johnny turned pale, left the cafe without even paying for the coffee, and fled. I heard from a mutual acquaintance of Johnny that he had borrowed some money to support Irene. It seems he hasn't repaid it, and they speculated that he might still be in the process of repaying it. From now on, Johnny will likely work tirelessly to repay his debts and support his own life. I hope he reflects on his actions. As for me, after that, I finally found a condominium that suited my taste. It's located near Frederick's condominium, and Frederick agreed to it as well. During the move, I received help from Frederick's friends, and in gratitude, I treated them to steak. Everyone was delighted, so I think it went well. Living alone is something I'm trying for the first time in my life. I used to live with my parents until I got married, so I didn't expect to be so excited at this age. And then a happy event happened to me. It was Frederick's wedding. Frederick has been dating a colleague from work for the past 3 years, and recently the two of them came to us for a marriage proposal. She's adorable, and her personality is wonderful. Their wedding is scheduled for next year, and I can't help but look forward to the future. With the new addition to our family, I want to enjoy my single life from now on and live happily.